Jewel Walker, Julie Mergel, and Cheryl Allen.
Okay. All right, let's give Susie 1 minute.
Okay.
So is McCall able to join us?
She's in my office.
I'm
Yeah,
here.
her Zoom account is acting up, so she's just
Okay.
sitting here
All right.
on my desk.
Will we be able to see you if we call on you, McCall?
Do you need to see me?
Well, I guess if you're going to.
If you want, Chris can just turn the camera.
Yeah, we're good. Okay, we're good. All right, well, let's go ahead and begin. I'll call this meeting to order. That today is
Susie. Susie, I'm promoting Susie.
okay.
Hello, Tim. Didn't get to say hi to you earlier.
Is she
All right,
on?
I'm on
Oh, I hear.
as a panelist.
Okay.
There
All
she
right.
is. Okay.
Welcome, Susie. I'll call this meeting to order of the Board of Public Education. Today is Wednesday, it's Wednesday, April 12th, and it is 1:02 p.m. So welcome, everybody. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Chris, will you do roll call
Yes. Madeline Quinlan,
here?
Susie Hedlund,
Here,
Ann Keith,
Here.
Ron Slinger,
Here.
Dr. Tharp,
Here.
Jane Hammond.
Here.
Renee Rasmussen, Charles Fox,
Here.
Superintendent Arnson's office. They're here. And Commissioner Christian, Governor Gianforte. Okay.
Great, thank you. I'd next like to read the statement of public participation. The Board of Public Education encourages the public to participate in board discussions. Persons who wish to participate should sign the public comment sign-in sheet and identify themselves to the board chair or executive director prior to the board's consideration of the matter for which the persons are concerned. Anyone wishing to participate in board discussions will be recognized by the chairperson in keeping with normal board parliamentary procedure. We discourage public comment on personnel matters and ask that you discuss these issues in private with the board chair. The Montana Board of Public Instruction is a professional development unit provider. Attending a Board of Public Education meeting may qualify you to receive professional development units. Please complete the necessary information on the sign-in sheet if you are applying for professional development units. Thank you. Before we adopt the agenda, I'll open it up for public comments on any items that are not listed on the agenda. Any public comment?
I see no public comment, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. Next, we'll adopt the agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved by Board Member Slinger and seconded by Board Member Hedlund that we adopt the agenda. Is there board discussion? Public comment? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay, we have one item on the agenda, so I'll turn it over to our accreditation committee chair, Dr. Tharp, and Dr. Tharp, feel free to call on our executive director if you'd like her to make any opening comments.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Chair Quinlan. But thank you all for your time today. I know it's a busy time of year for many of us, so I appreciate it. Reason we're here today is came to us after our adoption of Chapter 55 at our last meeting, is that could be problematic for some schools when it comes to adopting specifically two of the requirements, and you see that in your agenda. For the record, they're 10.55.905 sub 2C and sub 2H, which involves the requirement to offer a half a year of civics or government and a half a unit of economics or financial literacy, and some concerns that could be problematic for schools to implement that right away. The rest of chapter 55 obviously goes into effect then on July 1 this year, coming up very soon, and this could mean some difficulty for schools to retool and get themselves figured out to be able to offer those classes right away for next year. In addition to concern about fairness for students already in the pipeline who are already planning, had a course plan starting freshman, sophomore year, and then all of a sudden encountering an additional requirement that they hadn't anticipated, plus the problem of schools being able to possibly find teachers to teach those and the schedules that might need to be juggled around. So I'm not sure if you want to discuss it first, just to kind of see where people are, or if you would like to just have a motion on the floor and then we can discuss it around that, because it really just comes down to, I'm prepared to offer a motion to delay those two particular expectations for 2 years, pushing it out to July 1 of 2025. But I understand that there's going to be discussion and others that might want to put that out even longer. So, Madam Chair, what's your pleasure?
Board Member Tharp, why don't you go ahead and put a motion on the floor, and it seems like we'll be able to fully discuss the motion, and if
Okay.
there's interest in a different date, it will come up at that point.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, which is one agenda item and one thing to discuss. We shouldn't get too confused. So I move to approve the delayed effective date to Title 10, Chapter 25, Standards of Accreditation for 10.55.902 sub 2C and sub 2H to July 1 of 2025, and authorize filing with the Secretary of State. All other rules adopted, amended, repealed, and transferred remain effective on July 1, 2023. Madam Chair.
Okay, you've heard the motion to delay the effective date for 10.55.905, 2C and 2H. Is there a second?
I'll second, Madam Chair.
Okay, so it's been moved by Board Member Tharp and seconded by Board Member Hammond. Is there board discussion?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Board Member Keith.
So Dr. Tharp, just to put the dates in I'm trying to go backwards. The adoption date would start the year 25, which means graduates of 26.
Correct.
And that's the current sophomores, like the incoming sophomores. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So incoming sophomores would have new graduation requirements.
Yes. And part of the idea around that is that a freshman schedule is pretty well locked in. They don't have a whole lot of options there. There was discussion about postponing it even later, but then anything sooner would really put a crimp on some of the schools as well. So yes.
And I understand like the argument for saying, okay, let's not change the rules of graduation for current sophomores. Like if you make it go with the incoming freshmen, they would have the new graduation requirements. I understand how that's clean for their 4 years of study. My concern is, as a parent, if I have a current sophomore and I see these important standards coming in, I'd be like, wait, what about my kid? I want them to have it too. So I battle back and forth between that.
Yep.
I think I'm going to ask, actually, at this point, we should ask for public comment, and that will help maybe broaden our discussion as we move through that. So let's ask for public comment from those who are online.
Madam Chair, I'm promoting school administrators in Montana.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
For the record, my name is Rob Watson. I'm the Executive Director for the School Administrators of Montana. And just a couple of things, I do really appreciate your consideration of extending the deadline for implementation of this important rule. I think it's a good rule. I appreciate the call out to civics and financial literacy. I think both of those are really good things to incorporate into grad requirements. And I should just preface my comments saying that I don't necessarily have any great concerns about civics, because I think civics can be weaved into a lot of existing social studies requirements that kids already have to take. And I think you could weave those in any given school year and not necessarily miss a beat. The financial literacy one is a little bit harder, just because currently in most high schools, that could be considered an elective course, perhaps in a business class or a CTE class. And what you'd likely do with that, I think schools would have a couple of options. They could take the concepts from financial literacy and place it in a variety of different courses, so that no matter which path that a student chose, they would get some financial literacy. So that's kind of option one. Option two, they could develop a standalone course of financial literacy and require every kid to take it. That would be a little more difficult, because you'd have to find enough certified teachers in that area, which would likely be business teachers. Another option is they could weave it into a required course, like in a social studies course, which again might be a little bit of a stretch for social studies curriculum. So my point being is that chances are, I think if it were me, what I would try to do is weave the concepts of financial literacy into every single CTE class that we offer. So like if I was really interested in ag education, I could take my ag education class, but there would be a component of it that would be financial literacy. Or if I was interested in culinary arts, there'd be a portion of culinary arts that would be financial literacy. To me, that would seem the best way to make sure that those skills were addressed for every single student. Which brings me to my just some thoughts around when to implement this. A lot of students take their CTE course their freshman year and they get it out of the way, and then they don't have to worry about it for the next 3 years. Some students wait until their final year to take CTE. Some students take 4 years of CTE, but most districts require probably only 1 year. We would hope that kids take more than 1 year, but there's a lot of kids that only take 1 year. And so, if you implement it as of 2025, you'd likely have some current freshmen and sophomore that may have already taken their CTE class as a freshman. And then once they get into the requirement, then would they have to go back and take that CTE class again, or a different one? So by putting it at 2025, I think what you're doing is just limiting the ways that districts can implement it. Whereas if you put it at 4 years, then you'd have more opportunity to weave it into existing coursework. And for that freshman class coming in next year, that would be their new requirement, that sometime in that 4 years, they're going to have to get into a course that has some of those financial literacies. So, and then the last thing I'll say is that if you look at the model policy for school districts, and we all prescribe to the school board policies from the Montana School Boards Association, the model policy speaks to the fact that, number one, we want to meet the graduation requirements that are prescribed by the Board of Public Ed. That's first and foremost. But it also says that when a school board adopts new policy around graduation, it generally impacts the incoming freshman class, unless there's some reason that the district could show that it's not going to adversely impact by instituting the grad requirement right away. So that's the current model policy. It's 2410 in the model policies, if you want to read that language. But generally what happens is most districts adopt it for the incoming freshman class, unless it's something that doesn't necessarily adversely affect the current students. So I appreciate the opportunity for public comment, and be open for any questions you might have. But I do appreciate the discussion today. I know you had to call a sort of non-scheduled meeting to have this discussion. So I really do appreciate that because I think it's a worthy topic to discuss. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. Other public comment?
Yes, Cheryl Allen is requested to speak. Promoting her now.
Let me try this again.
We
There
can
we
hear
go.
you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate Chair Quinlan, members of the board, just a thought to think about. It's an intriguing idea that we look at integration of courses across the spectrum. And as we have that conversation at the same time, it would be a discussion around what does competency transcripts look like? Because really what we're talking about is we go from the Carnegie on credit to a competency based, which of course is one of those key movements that's going on in our country right now. And so I would just encourage that if we look at going that direction, we also start talking about what does a competency transcript and does that meet the graduation requirements that currently are structured in credits? I think it's a fabulous discussion to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment?
I see none, Madam Chair.
Okay. So further board discussion or questions for others who have made public comment?
Madam Chair.
Dr. Tharp.
Yeah, I've got a question for OPI. I recall when I took my social studies methods class, it included a unit on teaching of economics. Would we be interpreting the accreditation rules and teacher licenses to allow a social studies broad field or a history teacher to be able to teach economics? And has there been discussion as far as exactly which endorsements would be allowed to teach an econ or financial literacy class?
So Chair Quinlan, Member Tharp, I believe the answer to that would be yes, because part of the discussion to start with was the ability for these to be instructed. So if you go over into the mathematics arena, there's actually components of financial literacy that show up in elements of mathematics. If you go over to economics, you're going to find elements of financial literacy there. You're also going to find civics pretty strongly in econ as well. So yes, I think the long and short answer to that would be yes.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Dr. Tharp.
Regarding the civics, are there any schools in the state that aren't already offering a civics class? I mean, that was always a full year of government was always an expectation in any of the schools I was at.
Yeah, Chair Quinlan, Member Tharp, I believe, and I see Dr. Mergel is with us, I believe there were 5 or 6 schools identified that do not currently instruct in civics. So the vast majority identified had civics already included.
Dr. Mergel, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yes, good afternoon, you all. Julie Mergel, Chief Operating Officer at the Montana Office of Public Instruction. For the record, I just wanted to answer 2 questions that Dr. Tharp had. So yes, there were 5 high schools who were identified. that had not a course code that aligned directly to government or civics. The second piece, Dr. Tharp, I wanted to share with you, you asked about the economics component. Because of what you just mentioned, the way that the ARM was written, you will notice it says economics or financial literacy, because that allowed that ability for this half a unit to be included within social studies as economics, included within mathematics as algebra, financial algebra, or included in CTE as financial literacy, if you will. So I just wanted to answer that question for you around your economics piece. And then to also address, when we looked at those 5 particular schools, it looked like it was not a big a shift, if you would. It was just a matter of more of which course code were they using to describe the course that they were offering. So I hope that helps. Thanks.
Dr. Mergel, I wanted to ask you to clarify something that you had brought up in a discussion that we had previously with our accreditation committee. And it goes back to a question that board member Keith asked early on here about the graduating class of 2026. And I know at the time you encouraged us not to think so much in cohorts, but we should look at students that graduate before the date that we establish or after, and how that requirement. So if you could maybe reiterate that, that'd be helpful, I think.
Yes, so thank you, Madam Chair. So in terms of ARM, there are a couple of other rules, if you will, within 1055, I think it's 906, around credit, that a school board could issue credit earlier. They could, if they demonstrate, right, meeting these standards in other ways, like within a internship or work-based learning, those also could be issued. And so I think that there is some other rules that do provide some flexibility to grant some of those credits earlier, not just by age or cohort, if you will. I hope that answers your question, Madam Chair.
I think it does, but I think maybe we want to clarify that the date that we choose this afternoon, a student who graduates before that date will not have to meet the new requirement of financial literacy or civics, but a student who graduates after that date, no matter which cohort they're in, would have to meet that graduation requirement.
Madam Chair, that is correct. So students graduating any time before before July 1 of 2025 would not be impacted. So that would mean students that are graduating in the class of 2024, students graduating in the class of 2025 would not have to meet this graduation requirement. The first class that would need to meet that graduation requirement, if you're talking about cohorts, based upon what Dr. Tharp had proposed, would be the graduating cohort class of 2026, or anybody who graduated. So what you're talking about earlier, but if somebody graduates and they would have been in the cohort of 2026, but they graduate, say, in June of 2025, then they would not have to meet that requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Further board discussion.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I have a question for our Executive Director. If McCall could clarify what exactly it is in the rule between the difference between a school's requirement to offer the classes versus the requirement that a student have these credits to graduate.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Tharp. So in 1055-904, there's still the requirement that school districts offer both civics or government and financial literacy or economics. So I think the question that board member Keith was asking, if a parent really wanted their student who may not be impacted by the delayed effective date to take these important new standards, they certainly could. I mean, school districts are still going to have to offer those. So they're still going to be available for those students who do have the flexibility and who might be interested in taking it earlier than they may have to meet the requirement.
Any further board discussion? And I guess I would put out there, if anybody does want to propose a different date, you'd need to be making a substitute motion, or if board member Tharp wanted to amend his motion, that's also an option. So I want to just make sure people understand what the options are if they're contemplating a different date. Further board discussion. Board member Keith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess hearing what Dr. Watson said, if districts are usually following the model policy that says new graduation requirements start with the freshman class, I would like to keep on that same precedence and say that this would, schools will offer it to all the students, but the incoming freshmen would be the first class that have to meet it for requirement. So I would propose amending Dr. Tharp's motion.
And I think what you want to do is make a substitute motion.
Well, I was hoping he would do it.
Well, let's see.
But I'd
Dr.
like to
Tharp,
hear if people are opposed to that. Talk me out of it.
I guess, Board Member Keith, Madam Chair, I guess my feeling is I need more to talk me into bumping it all the way to 27. So I would love to hear more from the other board members.
other board discussion.
I guess I understand what Dr. Watson was saying for precedent. I guess Dr. Tharp would be the only thought of mine of why we would do that. But if we think this is critical for students and we want to move on it now, I don't think we would be impeding or causing any challenges with students if we move forward with the date that we have proposed to change to.
Thank you, Board Member Hedlund. Any other board members want to make any comments? Okay.
Madam Chair,
Board Member Slinger.
thank you. So I think I'm not really in favor of moving a date back, but I guess I have a question that I need clarification on. What are the other alternatives for? So let's say there's a student who, sophomore, they've already taken the CTE that would have taken care of this for them. Is there another pathway for them with an independent study with a to meet that requirement? How would that be solved?
Could I call on somebody from OPI to address that question?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Merkel.
Of course, Chair Slinger, Board Member Slinger as well. So yes, there'd be lots of different ways that school districts could do that, right? It could be an independent study. It could be a course. It could be within an economics for their social studies. So it doesn't necessarily have to be CTE. I think it comes back to a comment that Deputy Allen had made, right? And currently the current system of how these graduation requirements are sitting are based upon credits and units, and those units are based upon particular number of minutes. And this requirement, as it currently sits, is a half a unit. So that half a unit would require, the number of minutes for that half a credit to be granted. But that could come in multiple different ways, because the board, as I had mentioned, they do have the flexibility to offer that credit shorter amount of time or in different ways. So it could be a dual credit class. It could be within their social studies requirement that they haven't quite met yet. It could be within a math class that they haven't met. It could be dual credit. It could be a independent study. It could be an internship. So there are multiple ways that a school district could design that within the system. There is some flexibility. It was written intentionally that way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other board discussion, Board Member Keith.
Thank you. This is for Susie and probably Tim, since you are acting administrators. With that timeline proposed, does that give most districts enough time to get this underway? I just don't want to burden them.
Yeah, I think,
Board Member Headland?
oh, sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I forget about our formalities over Zoom. I would say that we're going to be making a lot of adjustments coming out of the legislative session. So the timing might be good. I think everybody's going to be making quite a few changes and we can put this in with those. Personally, I don't know if Dr. Tharp has a different opinion.
Madam Chair, Board Member Keith, I don't see it being problematic. I would think that if schools are running into issues meeting it, they can always go with the Digital Academy or find some other alternatives. I think there's so many different options available there for them that I think, bumping it out to 25 would give them adequate time. One of my concerns is something that actually you brought up earlier, is that, this is an important thing, and bumping it all the way to 27. My concern might be the schools put it on the back burner and then in 3 years realize, oops, we forgot to get to that, and then ask for a variance because they didn't do anything to get this into place. So I would think that 2 years should give them enough time to retool and do whatever they need to do. But if they are struggling with that, we still have the variances that schools could come through OPI to us and say, hey, we just don't see any way around this. We ask for a variance, and this is how we want to meet the standard through a different approach. So that flexibility being available to them.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, that said, Board Member Keith, are you good? Do you want to change the motion or amend the motion? Okay,
Nothing.
great. Any further board discussion before we go for a vote? Board Member Tharp.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I guess with all due respect to Dr. Watson and school administrators, I guess I would take Board Member Keith's question and pitch it to him and see, is he hearing from his constituents that this is going to be a major heartache, or is it just, as Board Member Headland said, one of many things that are going to have to be retooled?
Yeah, I think it might depend on the size of district. So, oh, sorry, better go speaking out of turn again. Madam Chair.
Dr. Watson, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. I do think Board Member Headland probably summarized it best. It really does depend on the size of the district, what the options are. Depends on what teachers you have certified in what areas, quite honestly. And then it also depends on how much you want to upset the apple cart. So if you go in and require a new class, typically what that means is that you're limiting the number of other classes that kids can take. And so then you have to decide, well, is it going to require a new certified teacher? Can we ask somebody that's already certified in this area to teach? So there's all kinds of things that come into play, which and to answer Dr. Tharp, your question directly, I have not heard from my members on this, but quite honestly, we haven't really discussed it that much as a group. This time of year, I don't know if most folks have their brain wrapped around that yet, but as Board Member Headland said, I mean, we're going to have a bunch of changes this spring with the legislature wrapping up and some things that'll have to be changed. I can tell you that when districts engage in changing graduation requirements, it's usually, I mean, and this is above and beyond just the basic requirements that are required by the Board of Public Ed. When a district engages in changing their own graduation requirements above and beyond that, it's a pretty extensive process. And I would imagine that districts would engage in that, especially if they knew that, that this is a requirement that's going to be coming soon for the new grads. And so if it were me and knowing that this is coming, I would start that graduation requirement discussion right away. You might miss the current freshman class that's going in because the graduation requirements have to be adopted by the local trustees. which requires a process of getting feedback from stakeholders, plus holding board meetings to adopt the new grad requirements. Even though they're adopted by the Board of Public Ed, you have to adopt how it's going to impact your local requirements through your Board of Trustees. So there will be a process there. And like I said before, what I'm worried about is you might miss that current freshman class because you may not be able to get those changes implemented right away for that current freshman class. But it's doable. I guess that's the long answer. I'm sorry, Dr. Tharp. Should have said that.
All right. Any further board discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Motion carries. All right. I'd like to call on our executive director to just describe then what are the next steps from here in terms of next steps in the process.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next step in the office is to get this supplemental notice finalized and off to the Secretary of State's office. This is really just the formal way for us to show school districts that the board has taken a formal action to delay the effective date. And like we said, very specific to 1055-905 2C and 2H. And then, you know, if there's further information that we need to share, whether we use partners like SAM and OPI, we can certainly work with them to get that out as well.
Great. Okay. Thank you. That concludes the items on our agenda. Is there any public comment before we conclude the meeting? Any public comment? No hands raised, Chris?
None.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you all. And I will adjourn the meeting. It's 1:37. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.